Guest, Representative Donald Norcross of New Jersey. Catherine, North Conway, New Hampshire, Independent Line. Hi there. Oh, let me push the button first. Go ahead. Catherine, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have very, very short three comments. The first is, it should be on the Democratic agenda, no Keystone Pipeline, no fracking. That's first. Secondly, Democrats should be asking more questions. Could it be that the oil companies are, in fact, in favor and gleeful of global warming and thwarting efforts to stop it? For with the Arctic ice melting and opening up the area to drilling means money in their pockets. Thirdly, we have to get more creative, the Democrats. If poppies grow in Afghanistan soil better than wheat and bring in more cash, and they can grow 2 crops of poppies during the growing season, how come other uses for poppies than heroin aren't in the works? We should be figuring out how perhaps you can grind up the stalks to make paper products, cement, or pave something. Anyway, we have to ask questions, become more creative, and not do things to harm our environment.
Well, thank you for the call. Certainly, we all care very much for the environment. And it's always a balance between those who certainly want to enjoy the ability to drive their car, heat their homes with the energy that we presently have, or the options on the other side of the coin is where do we meet in the middle? I was part of a group in New Jersey called the Work Environment Council, which is trying to bring together, making sure that people had opportunities for employment while making our consideration for the environment a very high level, and making sure that we try to blend those two together because they're not always in the same direction, and certainly you mentioned a few of those issues. Thank you.
Brad from Minnesota, Democrats line. You are next. Good morning.
Hello.
You're on. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. My question to him is this. Why do you allow atheists on your show? And the other thing I got to say to you, we're deindustrialized. You don't hear about Los Angeles anymore being smog. It's in China. The other question I got for you is I'm a veteran. Why in Sauk Center, Minnesota, is a goddamn veteran home being run by a Wickham?
Well, certainly, I want to thank you for your service to our country as a veteran, and I'm not sure the issue you're talking about in Minnesota, but again, as I mentioned earlier, make sure you reach out to your local representatives. I'm sure they can address the issue.
Ray Lehman off of Twitter says that he spoke with Congressman Lobiondo about Trade Promotion Authority and trade issues. Where do you stand on trade issues? Should the U.S. be doing more trade?
Yes, the short answer is that, but it has to be done fairly. It's not free trade, it's fair trade. And if we go back to the NAFTA, which I think has really set the stage for many of the trade agreements since then, I know too many people who are displaced because of those agreements, and I think there needs to be fair trade. Obviously, most countries, particularly over in the Middle East and, in the Far East, are paying their employees much less. So it's not just about dollars, but it's the conditions they're working in. We've seen some of these sweatshops time and time again where the collapses have come in because they're not enforcing the type of rules that we have in this country. As long as we have a fair playing ground, that's really what people care about. Is it fair? Am I getting a straight shot of it? I don't have to win every time. I just need to know it's a fair shot. And I think that should govern our trade policy.
So the trade policy being considered for the Asian area of the world, is that fair in your estimation?
No. I'm not going to mix words. No, I don't think it's fair the way it's set up.
Because specifically why?
Well, there's a number of issues here. This goes back to, again, I mentioned NAFTA earlier because that set the stage really for all the agreements we've had since then. So when we're not playing by the same set of rules, whether it's environmental issues, making sure they're not clogging the air with the coal that comes out of, particularly in China. And we were visiting Taiwan, and the earlier caller was talking about, what other parts of the world are doing. Literally, the wind blows over, so China, along their coast, blows right into their neighboring country. Well, that's a problem. Whether it's trade, dealing with employment issues, which is extremely important, make sure that no child is working or being forced to work. So if we level the playing field, make sure that the enforcement of environmental rules, make sure the enforcement of the work rules to make sure we're not enslaving any of these folks, particularly in the third world countries, then it becomes a much fairer issue.
Here is Tim from Kansas City, Republican line. Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. And my question is on what's your viewpoint on the fact of illegal immigrants in this country? We're spending literally probably hundreds of billions of dollars feeding these people, giving them housing, giving them everything, and they're not even citizens. They don't belong here.
Well, with all due respect, these people are us. In fact, if we had the rules in place that we do today, a century ago, I would say most of us wouldn't even be sitting here. The fact of the matter is we need to have an immigration policy that works for all Americans. I just want to share one example on why I think this is so important. My son met a young lady when he was serving in South Korea, who was serving in the Army. They were married, they had my first grandchild. And then I got a call one night. She was being deported. This was a shock to all of us. So here, come to find out, when she was a very young girl, her parents brought her up from Mexico, was able to serve in our Army, defend our nation. Yet we were turning around and going to deport her. Well, the short story is we were able to untangle the web several years ago, and she has since become an American citizen. But the point I want to make here is there needs a pathway to become an American citizen. We have been that dream for almost 2 centuries, and I think we need to have that, because it's that diversity really makes our country great. I very much believe in a policy that works for America as a whole, but certainly giving opportunities that those who want to call America home.
Where did you stand about the president's executive actions on deportation?
I am in favor of what he did. The only issue I would have is I wish it was done earlier. Anytime that you have no decision creates more havoc. So I'm glad that he made the stand, and we're going to hopefully work towards a immigration bill that both the Republicans and the Democrats can work with, because I think both sides understand that our country is a nation of immigrants. That's how we became this great nation, and we want to do that in the future.
So looking forward to that, where do you think those common ground areas are in dealing with immigration?
Well, certainly we have to secure the borders. There's no question about that. The U.S. security comes first. Making sure that those are here are paying their fair share of taxes, that they're not breaking our laws, and that they have become part of the American fabric. As I mentioned with my daughter-in-law, those children who are brought here have no idea of any other life but here in America. They shouldn't be punished because of a bureaucratic issue that happened with their parents. So those are the 3 issues that primarily in an immigration bill that I would be supportive of.
Post Falls, Idaho, Republican line. Here is Tom. Hi.
Good morning, Tom.
Hi. Well, he just kind of answered my question about immigration. I was very disappointed to hear that he agrees with the president. My question is about separation of powers and an imperial president simply decreeing what the people's representatives should be passing as bills and signed into law or vetoed, instead of doing whatever he wants as he chooses, not as the American people who sent their representatives to Washington to represent them chose.
Well, I understand, I hear your point, but the fact of the matter is this executive actions have been taken by presidents of both parties over the last half century, and I think he is doing the people's work.
Cynthia is from New Jersey, Democrats line. Hi, Cynthia. What part of New Jersey are you from?
Winona in Gloucester County.
I represented them as a senator, and glad to have you in a wonderful place. It is a charming small town America.
Cynthia, go ahead.
Right. Thank you. I agree. That's why I just can't move from Winona. I'm just going to speak briefly on the pipeline. I'm really not in favor of it, but I do have. I just like to say that I would like some election reform. The presidential campaign goes on forever. We're already talking about it. And I don't know how you can work towards it, but I would just like to say that that's what I would like.
Well, thank you for your comment. Being from Gloucester County and dealing with pipelines, as you know, Gloucester County is home to 3 major refiners that have been there for close to a century, provided those great jobs that our men and women have been able to work at. And quite frankly, they're fed many times from underground pipelines. So it is something that has been part of our American energy fabric for close to a half a century. When it comes to election reform, it is a great democracy. This is what makes our country great, is that ongoing debate. But I will agree with you. It seems the presidential season tends to get further and further out, but you know, people are willing to listen. They want to call into shows like this to express their views. So this is part of our great democracy, and I'm very supportive of it.
Just to get your thoughts on the front page of the USA Today talks about the price of oil consistently dropping, but particularly what it's doing to companies that deal with oil, especially the choices they have to make now that they're getting less per barrel. What do you think about these as going forward, especially, and the larger issue of energy in the United States?
Well, certainly we're down below a $50 a barrel, and it's dropping quite quickly. And the market will help recover here. If there's over drilling and too much on one end, they're going to slow down. That's the great part about our economy, is that it will react to this. Now, on the other side of the coin, for those who fly each and every day or drive their car, this is a great thing. We're getting those prices down, particularly after we were approaching $5 a gallon. So on one hand, these companies are going to have to react. And listen, they weren't hit blindsided by this. They understood that this is part of the action that they have to take, depending on the amount and supply of that. I think it's a good thing for America overall. These companies will adjust, as they always do, and they'll come back.
From Chicago, here is Bruce, Republican line. Go ahead, you're next.
Yes, sir. I take exception to the fact that when the gentleman talks about past immigration and we're all immigrants, I mean, those people weren't illegal immigrants. It was a legal immigration. Mm-hmm. And I also think about him saying, well, you know, they were surprised when his daughter, whoever it was, got deported. Well, the reason
she wasn't got deported.
Well, the proceedings were in place.
She was notified.
But I mean, how can you be surprised if you're breaking the law that somebody comes to enforce the law?
Here's the point that I'm trying to make. Obviously, the United States Army thought she was well qualified and let her in, and they were aware of her status. But more importantly is what I was mentioning is the rules that are in place today were not in place 50, 100 years ago. That's the difference. The rules, it's much tougher to come into the United States today than it was when my great-grandparents steamed into New York and saw the Statue of Liberty. So what we want to do is make sure it's a fair pathway to citizenship.
Have Republicans come to talk to you about these type of issues, get your support on areas they could work on together, particularly when it comes to immigration?
Well, I'd like to say in the last 6 weeks we've had some great conversations, and we're all headed to that direction. I think both sides understand we have to have a policy in place and backed up by a law. The president took this action because of inaction by Congress. We'll take responsibility for that. And hopefully with the new leadership on both sides, as I say, the adults will come into the room and make the decisions that the American people elected us for.
Last call. This is Todd from Illinois. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we're becoming too overcrowded, and we need to shut off all immigration, legal or illegal, and accept who we have here, but shut it off and don't take any more. We're not even going to have enough fresh water in another 50 years.
Well, I understand your frustration, and I'm sure these same conversations were 50, 100 years ago as the Italians were coming over, as the Irish were coming over, and the English were coming over. I again want to say this is the greatness of our country, is the diversity, because I think we have the best country in the world, and it's because of our policy and the ability for people to come to the American dream.
Our guest serves the 1st District of New Jersey, Democratic Representative Donald Norcross. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
We will take a break and then have a short session of open phones. If you want to comment on those, here are the lines. 202-748-8000, our line for Democrats. 202-748-8001 for Republicans. And 202-748-8002 for independents. Go ahead and make those calls now. We will take them after this break as Washington Journal continues. Later on in the program, James Fallows on the American military, his cover story for The Atlantic.